Well, hello, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I will be your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night, we talked about the smell of poison, and how it's not simply a question now of our bodies being poisoned, and because our bodies are poisoned, our minds are drugged. Basically, we're drugged into another realm of reality to the point where our masters, junior management, and Hate Incorporated, can convince us to do the most amazing things to destroy ourselves. It is a group of con men. I think this gets back to words we should never use. We should never talk, say, New World Order or reptilians or conspiracy theories or Satanists. We should simply call our masters what they are: gangsters, con artists. Because those words, those phrases, those terms have not been programmed into us to put us to sleep. The moment, for example, you say New World Order, your brain has been programmed to fall asleep by the media. It doesn't matter who you are. We've all been exposed to Western media. I mean, the greatest examples of American media that I encountered was in New Zealand, of all places. The New Zealanders get most of their culture from the United States, and they are so completely programmed by Western media. It's absolutely incredible. But we've been programmed to have our minds shut down when we hear certain phrases, certain concepts. And if it wasn't for that, our masters would be in prison or hung by now. And they know that. So certain words we shouldn't use are New World Order, Satanists, Evil Incorporated, whatever. We should call them gangsters, thugs, because that's what they are. I'll give you an example, and it's an unpleasant example, so I'll warn you in advance. It is a fact, sadly, that our masters kidnap our children. They rape our children. They then skin our children alive and eat their flesh. At a certain point in time, I guess the amusement value isn't there anymore, and then they kill our children. And this is all done in satanic black mass ritual. Now, the moment I talk about this to you, your brain turns off. You stop listening. That's completely understandable beyond the obvious horrors of the concept. We have been conditioned that these things just can't happen. Now imagine, for example, for a moment, imagine what would happen if you did listen to what I just said. If you then opened your eyes and look around you and notice that the children in your neighborhood are disappearing, never to be seen again. That there are parts of your city, parts of the forest. There's a very famous forest, it's called the New Forest, in a place called Dorset in England, where 6 to 7 children every week are murdered, found dead. Nobody notices. How is that possible? Well, let's say for the sake of argument you did notice. All of a sudden you woke up and found your children were missing and tortured to death, mutilated to a point where it made the police sick just to examine the bodies. Imagine if you woke up to that, and your neighbors woke up, and the people next door woke up, and the next neighborhood woke up. Our masters would be gone in a day. But because of the smell of poison, the poison that's in our foods, the poison that's in our airwaves, the poison that surrounds us everywhere, we just can't deal with reality. Now, I go into town maybe twice a month. And I got on the train yesterday, and I thought I was going to die. I had just gone through yet another very heavy detox here in Europe. And I got on the train, and I found that my body was even cleaner than it was. It's incredible. I could smell things that you would not believe. I could smell the poisons leaching out of the bodies of the people around me. The cigarettes they smoke, purified down to pure formaldehyde, artificial pure formaldehyde, an artificial pure nicotine. I could smell the chemicals, the petrochemicals in the foods that they've eaten. And this stuff is sweating, leaching out of their body as they sweat. I couldn't breathe. I could not breathe. It took me hours and hours before I could acclimate myself to the absolute pure stench of the people around me, from the foods they're eating, from the cigarettes they're smoking. And there's no possible way that anybody with that much poison in their systems could be able to think for themselves. It's just not possible. I know this because I used to be one of those people. I never smoked, I never did drugs, but I ate all of my food from the big grocery store chains. And I ate at McDonald's 3 times a day. I still have this big fat roll of skin to prove it. And I know what happens when you start eating organic food. You are what you eat. And the poison started to leach out of my body. As I say, I've had 10 very extreme examples of detoxing as the poisons in my body were ejected quite forcefully, because I finally gave my body a chance to breathe. I said, okay, I'm not going to eat any more poison. Body says, oh, great, I can get rid of what I've been holding on to because I didn't know what to do with it because you keep eating this stuff. And every time I detoxed, I could see the world around me more clearly. I could think more clearly. I could understand what was going on. Well, I'll rephrase that. I don't understand what's going on, but I could see it. And I dealt with it as it really was. The first real example of that is I fled the United States. The second example was when I fled New Zealand, which was actually worse than the United States. The chemicals in the food in the New Zealanders is astonishing. It all comes from China, and it's all plastic. And you can't possibly have that level of social engineering, of mind control, unless the people you're controlling are poisoned out of their minds, literally. And that would certainly account for what I saw in New Zealand. Here in Europe, a lot less poisons in the food. People are more human here. Much, much more human. These are the most human people I've ever encountered in my life. But it's your decision. You have to decide. The BBC and CNN, the mouthpieces, the media mouthpieces for our masters on 2 continents, are already talking about the fact that there is a dead brown dwarf star in our solar system that no one's ever seen before, quote unquote. And the mainstream media is astonished about something that we've known about for years. There are micro earthquakes, major swarms of earthquakes happening all over the world. That's not unusual. You've got a dead brown dwarf star, bigger than Jupiter, heading our way. The universe is electrical, electricity, magnetism, all the same thing. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of shaking. It's sort of like when a big dump truck passes in front of your house occasionally. Big, massive. We've all seen these big, massive dump trucks, 16 wheels, and they're carrying pieces of concrete or something. And they're so heavy that when they pass by your house, the ground shakes. Well, that's what's happening now. It's happening all over the world. It's your decision whether you want to see any of this or not. It's your decision whether you want to face the future as men and as women, standing on your own 2 feet, thinking for yourselves, making your own decisions, or continue as you are, on your knees, groveling to a handful of con artists, a handful of gangsters. It's your decision, up to you. Always has been, actually. And so tonight, I thought we would chat about Nationalize the USA. Now, what does that mean, nationalize? Well, basically it means that the government steps in and takes over, quote-unquote, private industry for the benefit of the people of that nation. Now, you'll hear in U.S. Western media the horrible stories of foreign countries nationalizing their industries, because it's horrible. Well, it's horrible for our masters because that means they're being kicked out of countries that they're raping. Just the other day, the president of Venezuela nationalized the gold industry there. Why? Because foreign companies owned by our masters were stealing the gold, and the people of Venezuela were getting no profit from it at all. So Chavez, the president, nationalized the gold industry. The government took over. And of course, Western media is horrified by this. Why? Because it means they've lost control. And that terrifies them out of their minds. Because the fear, of course, is other people will then decide, well, you know, you're robbing my country, you're raping my people. No. Problem, of course, is that back when little King George V, our fifth British leader named George, when little George Bush was president, I think there were like 70 countries around the world where U.S. military hit squads, murder squads, were operating. The same thing they used to blame the Russians for. Nah, the Russians had nothing on us. We're the deadliest murdering assassins in the world. And little George had these murder squads, U.S. military forces, deltas, operating in, I think, 70 countries. Now, under Obama, it's up to 160 countries. The great Minister of Peace, the Nobel Prize-winning man of peace, has death squads in 160 countries around the world. And what do? They kill anyone who opposes our masters. And they do it in our names. There's something you can think about tonight. So, nationalize the USA. Well, a while ago, when it was still possible, I thought, I had an idea called Incorporate America. Even had a website, incorporateamerica.com. Now, my idea at the time, and this was years ago, was that if you and I got together, pooled our resources, some cash, this is back when we all had jobs, and we bought shares in the top 1,000 corporations in the world, all based in the States, of course, well, Great Britain, we would then be shareholders of these companies, which would then give us access to the shareholders' meetings. It would give us access to a list of all who the shareholders were. We could then begin to go to shareholder meetings and say, hey, we don't want to invest in war. We want to invest in brownies. Anything. But we could inform the shareholders of the 1,000 top corporations that this is what the corporations were doing. They were investing in bioweapons, the weapons, the euphemism, weapons of mass destruction. They've been doing that for years. They've been investing in the destruction of foreign countries. We need to stop. And of course, this was a way of changing the system from within. And of course, not one of you stepped forward to help. And at this moment in time, now that's too late. It's too late for that now. We've gone so far beyond that this doesn't even equal a joke. Because today, every facet of the constitutional republic that was the United States of America has now become a private corporation. The United States of America, and you can look this up on the internet, the United States of America Incorporated. We're actually listed on Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet's great. In the United States, they are theoretically a reporting agency. Overseas, Dun & Bradstreet actually owns banks. They own several banks in New Zealand. I found this out quite by accident. Go to Dun & Bradstreet or find a friend of yours who's a stockbroker. Said, hey, I'd like to get a quote on United States of America Inc. What's it selling for today? The United States of America is now a corporation. We need to nationalize that. That means that the people of the United States need to stand up and say, we want our country back. And it's not simply the United States of America Incorporated. It's now the U.S. Department of Justice, Inc. The United States Department of Justice is now a privately owned offshore corporation, which means that people who do not even live in the United States own the United States Department of Justice, which is a corporation issuing shares. The United States Federal Reserve Bank sounds very nice, sounds very, governmental. It's not. It's owned by offshore banks. The United States Federal Reserve Bank is a privately owned corporation, owned offshore. Offshore owned, when I say an offshore corporation, that means that it's a corporation registered and filed. Again, go to Dun & Bradstreet and look it up. A privately owned offshore corporation means that people who are not U.S. citizens own the United States Federal Reserve Bank. Right now, you and I, we're told, owe the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank $14 trillion. Now, what does the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank do? It prints dollar bills. That's it. It prints paper money. That's all they do. What the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank does, this privately owned offshore corporation, it loans us our own money. It prints out a dollar bill and charges us 5 cents. That's all they do. That's it. And we're falling for this? Because we don't know what's going on. Because we're drugged out of our minds. We're terrified by the media. And a small group of gangsters, street thugs, hustlers, have conned us into believing that we need them to rob us. It's not very difficult. We have been robbed. For the fun of it, look up the courthouse in your neighborhood. You will find, you can look this up on Dun & Bradstreet, you will find that your local police department, your local courthouse, your local prison are all privately owned offshore corporations. Look up the city of Washington, D.C. It is a privately owned offshore corporation, as is the Vatican, and as is the city of London. Look it up. We need to nationalize our governmental agencies, which we thought we controlled. We don't. But again, it gets back to you with a gun and a copy of the Constitution and a million of your closest personal friends taking a wander over to Washington, D.C., taking a wander over to Wall Street with your gun loaded, completely visible. You're not a terrorist. You're an American citizen. You have the right, under the Constitution, to bear arms for your defense and the defense of your nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Print out a copy of the Constitution. Under the U.S. Patriot Act, that makes you a terrorist, by the way, so you might want to be careful with that. But you still have the right under the Constitution to have a gun, to protect yourself, to protect your country. In fact, it's a requirement under the Constitution. You are required to protect yourself, your family, your friends, your neighborhood, and your country. But carry a copy of the U.S. Constitution? Patriot Act says you're a terrorist. Isn't that weird? But until we understand that our country is now a corporation, until we understand that the departments of our government, which we thought we elected people to run, are actually privately owned corporations with shareholders who live overseas, have nothing to do with us, we're not going to make any progress. And it really gets down to the simplest thing you can think of. And this is not Moses and the Ten Commandments. This is not revelations from God. This is really, really, really simple. And because it's so simple, and because you're getting it for free, you won't listen. And it's this: stop eating poison. Stop drugging yourself. Because as I was taking the train in yesterday, and the stench from people's bodies just from the poisons they were eating, I was gagging. I thought I was going to have to fall down and just get some air. I didn't know what I was going to do. But you can't have your bodies that polluted with stuff you eat at McDonald's, stuff you get from the grocery store, and even begin to imagine that you can think clearly. You can't. You had the poison from the media, and now you're poisoned and confused and scared. And Lord knows I spent most of my life terrified out of my mind. But it's your decision. You have to decide all of these things. And because you're getting this information for free, you're simply going to ignore it. Because you're not getting it on CNN or the BBC, you're going to ignore it. You're going to ignore what's going on all around you because you're scared, you're frightened. That's perfectly reasonable. But you might, if you can, look at your friends and look at your family, the people that you love and who hopefully love you. What are you going to do for them if you care about them at all? If you're a mother, are you going to know for a fact that the food you're giving your children is poison and still feed them? I mean, if you love somebody, are you going to give them poison? Are you going to watch their lives disintegrate into nothing? To be homeless on the street, penniless and afraid? While a small group of thugs cons us into believing that we need them. It's your decision. It's up to you. The ancient Celts had a belief, a blessing, a prayer. They themselves were trusting and they themselves were wiped out. So I guess we're in good company. But as I think about it every day, I think I understand the blessing a little more every day. I am myself. I am no one else. I listen to what you say. I watch what you do. I am that I am. Statements that terrify our masters, junior management, the petty thugs, the criminals, terrifies them out of their minds. Just remember that next time they steal money from you. They're afraid. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. They need us. We don't need them. May you live as long as you wish. May you love as long as you live. For the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel fighting his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race, their black magic, captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.